Please subscribe to my channel. This is my sincere request to you, honey." They sang happy birthday with practiced joy until my sister handed me an invoice as if I were her employee. The bill totaled $28,000, but the secrets behind it were worth six figures in a marriage. She thought she was humiliating me before the whole town. She did not realize she had just triggered a 72-hour countdown. I simply smiled and told her I brought my receipts too. My name is Quinn Butler. If you looked at the invitation, this was supposed to be a celebration of my 30th birthday. But if you looked at the eyes of the guests gathered in the rented function room of the Briar Rose Hall, you would realize this was not a party. It was an ambush. The room was suffocatingly warm, smelling of cheap catering lasagna and stale perfume. My entire extended family had crammed into the space, a sea of familiar faces from Willow Briar, Colorado. They were buzzing with a manic sort of energy, the kind you usually see at a roast, not a milestone birthday. I stood near the head table, smoothing the fabric of my dress, watching them. My husband, Ethan, stood beside me. His hand was warmed against the small of my back, a steady anchor in a room that felt like it was tilting on its axis. He whispered that he could go get the car if I wanted to leave. I told him no. I told him to wait. I had been waiting for this night for 6 months. My sister Kendra tapped on the microphone. The feedback squeal cut through the chatter, silencing the room instantly. Kendra loved a microphone. She loved a stage. Tonight, she was dressed in a shimmering silver gown that outshone my own simple navy dress, which was typical. This was her show. I was just a prop. She smiled, that sugary practiced smile that she used to charm lenders and neighbors alike. She announced that before we cut the cake, she had a very special presentation. She called it a moment of truth. She said that turning 30 meant growing up, and growing up meant facing reality. The guests giggled. I saw my Aunt Sarah nudge my cousin, holding her phone up high to record. The red recording lights of a dozen smartphones stared at me like unblinking eyes. They knew what was coming. They had been primed for this. Kendra beckoned me forward. I walked to the center of the room. My face was composed. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs, but my hands were steady. Kendra handed me a box wrapped in excessive layers of satin ribbon. She told the room that our parents and she had been doing some math. She said they wanted to give me the gift of clarity. I pulled the ribbon. It fell away easily. I lifted the lid of the box. Inside there was no jewelry, no sentimental photo album, and no check. There was a single sheet of heavy cream-colored card stock. It was printed with professional formatting, complete with columns and a bold total at the bottom. I read it. I did not blink. It was an invoice. The header read, "For services rendered and gifts provided to Quinn Butler over the last decade." The itemized list was a work of fiction woven from threads of truth. It listed rent assistance that I had paid back years ago. It listed an old car that I had bought from my father at market value. It listed groceries. It listed graduation presents. The total at the bottom was bold and underlined $28,000. Kendra leaned into the microphone, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that reached every corner of the silent room. She said that this was the sum of everything the family had invested in me. She said that for my birthday they were forgiving the interest, but it was time I understood the cost of my lifestyle. The room erupted. It was not a gasp of horror. It was laughter. It was applause. My mother, Diane, was dabbing her eyes at the front table, looking like a martyr who had finally been vindicated. My father, Rick, nodded solemnly, crossing his arms as if he were a stern banker who had just denied a loan. Someone from the back shouted that it was finally time I learned. Another voice chimed in, saying that the free ride had to end sometime. They thought they were teaching me a lesson. They thought this was the moment I would crumble, cry, and beg for their forgiveness. While they graciously accepted my humiliation, they were rewriting history in real time, turning me into the family leech and themselves into the benevolent saviors. I looked at the invoice again. $28,000. I looked at Kendra. She was beaming, basking in the applause, waiting for my tears. I did not cry. I did not frown. I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. It was the smile of a chess player who watches their opponent move their queen directly into a trap. I reached for the microphone, but Kendra pulled it back slightly. I did not need it. The room had quieted down to hear my apology. I pitched my voice so it carried clear and sharp to the back of the room. I asked her if this meant that tonight we were playing by the books. Kendra blinked, her smile faltering for a microcount. She asked what I meant. I said that if we were auditing the past, we should be thorough. I told her that accuracy was important in accounting. I turned away from her and walked over to my purse, which was sitting on the cake table. It was a large structured tote. I reached inside. I did not pull out a tissue. I did not pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a 3-in binder. It was thick. It was heavy. It was reinforced with black duct tape along the spine, because the sheer volume of paper inside was straining the reins. I slammed it down onto the table. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. The cake stand rattled. The laughter died instantly. The applause withered away. I placed my hand on the cover of the binder. I looked at Kendra, then at my parents, and then at the guests who were still holding their phones up. I told them to keep recording. I told them this was the part they would want to save. I said that $28,000 was a cute number. I said it showed creativity. Then I flipped the binder open. The first page was not a single sheet. It was a summary spreadsheet color-coded and referenced. I turned the binder around so Kendra could see it. I pointed to the bottom line. I told her that I had brought my receipts too. The number on my page was not $28,000. It was significantly higher. It was a 6F-figure sum that represented every loan I had taken out in my name for them, every credit card debt they had racked up on my authorized user accounts, and every cash transfer I had sent to keep their lights on, their cars running, and their appearances maintained. I saw Kendra's eyes widen. She looked at the number, and for the first time in her life, she looked speechless. She tried to laugh, a nervous, high-pitched sound that cracked in the middle. She asked what this was. She tried to dismiss it as a joke. I did not let her. I turned the page. I revealed a photocopy of a bank transfer dated 3 years ago. I read the date and the amount aloud. $4,000 for a medical emergency that I later found out was a down payment on a luxury vacation. I turned another page. I showed a credit card statement with charges for a boutique in Denver, charged to a card I had been told was destroyed. I looked at Miles, Kendra's husband. He was standing near the bar holding a beer that he had forgotten to drink. His face had gone pale. He was looking at Kendra, and then at the binder, and then back at Kendra. He looked like a man who was trying to solve a puzzle that he did not know he was a part of. He walked forward, his steps slow and heavy. He asked Kendra if that was his signature on the document I was pointing to. Kendra tried to block his view. She told him it was just my little game. She said I was being dramatic. She tried to close the binder. I slammed my hand down on the open pages, pinning them to the table. I told her not to touch my property. The room was deadly silent now. The relatives who had been laughing were now shifting uncomfortably in their seats. They sensed the shift in atmospheric pressure. They realized that the predator and prey dynamic had just inverted. Then, from a table near the back, a woman stood up. She was not family. She was not a neighbor. She was wearing a sharp charcoal blazer, and her hair was pulled back in a severe no-nonsense bun. Most people there probably thought she was a friend from my workplace. They were wrong. This was Natalie Granger. She was the most vicious civil litigator in the county, and she was my +1. Natalie picked up her clutch and walked to the front of the room. Her heels clicked rhythmically on the hardwood floor. A steady countdown. She stopped beside me. She did not smile. She did not look at the cake. She looked directly at Kendra. Natalie reached into her bag and pulled out a thick legal-sized envelope. She placed it gently on top of my binder. She spoke in a voice that was low, calm, and terrifyingly professional. She said that this was not a prank. She said that inside the envelope was a formal demand letter along with a preservation of evidence notice. Kendra looked at the envelope as if it were a bomb. She asked who Natalie was. Natalie introduced herself. The name rippled through the room. A few of my older uncles stiffened. They knew the reputation. Natalie continued. She stated that Kendra and my parents had exactly 72 hours to respond to the discrepancies outlined in the attached financial exhibits. She mentioned that failure to respond or any attempt to destroy digital records would result in immediate escalation. My mother stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She shouted that this was a family birthday party, not a courtroom. She looked at me with betrayal in her eyes. The same eyes that had watched me pay her mortgage for 6 months while she told everyone I was struggling. I looked back at her. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. It was the feeling of a heavy weight being cut loose. I looked at the invoice for $28,000 that was still sitting on the table, forgotten and pathetic next to my binder. I picked it up. I folded it neatly in half, then in half again. I tucked it into the front pocket of my binder. I told them that they were right. I told them that the singing was over. I looked at Miles, who was now staring at his wife with a look of dawning horror. I looked at Kendra, who was pale and trembling, her script completely shattered. I took Ethan's hand. He squeezed my fingers, solid and supportive. I said that it was time we calculated for real. I turned my back on the cake, the balloons, and the family that had tried to monetize my existence. I walked toward the exit, my heels echoing in the silence behind me. I heard the first murmur of confusion turn into a roar of accusations, but I did not stop. The clock had started. 72 hours. The party was over. The war had just begun. Living in Willowbriar, Colorado is like living inside a snow globe that someone is constantly shaking. Everyone knows where you work, who you married, and what you bought at the grocery store on Tuesday. It is a town built on visibility. If you are doing well, people know. If you are struggling, people whisper. And if you are my family, you make sure the whispers are always scripted in your favor. My life outside of that suffocating function hall is actually quite structured. I like structure. I crave it. It is why I thrive at Crestline Patient Logistics. My title is Operations Lead, which is a sterile way of saying that I am the person who ensures that chaos does not win. When a non-emergency medical transport breaks down in a blizzard on the I-70, I am the one who reroutes the fleet. I manage schedules, budgets, and crises. I am good at my job because numbers do not lie. A spreadsheet does not gaslight you. A profit and loss statement does not guilt-trip you into covering its mistakes. At Crestline, I am respected. I am seen as the woman who keeps the wheels turning. I make a solid salary, enough to support a comfortable life, and I have never once asked my parents for a dime since the day I graduated college. Then there is my real sanctuary, my home. It is a modest two-story house on the edge of town, far enough away from my parents' place to require a deliberate drive, but close enough that I could never fully escape the gravitational pull. Inside those walls, life is different. There is Ethan. My husband is the kind of man who speaks only when he has something to say. He is steady, grounded, and painfully observant. We have a son, a toddler who is just learning that his feet can take him places he is not supposed to go. My son is the light. He is the one thing in my life that is completely untouched by the toxicity of my lineage. When I look at him, I do not see obligation. I see pure, unadulterated potential. I made a vow to myself the day he was born that he would never know the weight of the debt ledger I had been carrying since I was a teenager. But outside of my house, in my office, the script changed. In the theater of the Butler family, my sister Kendra was the undisputed lead actress. She was the star. She had a way of entering a room that demanded oxygen. She was vibrant, loud, and charming in a way that felt authentic until you tried to lean on it and realized it was made of smoke. She could spin a story out of thin air. If she was late, it was because she was helping a stranded motorist. If she was broke, it was because the economy was unfairly targeting her specific industry. I was not the star. I was the stage hand. I was the one who made sure the props were in place and the lights were on so Kendra could shine. I was the reliable one, the boring one, the one you called when the check bounced or the car made a funny noise. It did not start with a 6F Figueroa debt. It never does. It started with small, insidious favors that felt like emergencies. I remember the first time clearly. It was 5 years ago. Kendra had just moved into a new apartment downtown, a place that was frankly out of her budget, but she insisted it was necessary for her image as a budding interior designer. She called me in a panic. She was $200 short on the security deposit. Just $200. She promised she would pay me back on Friday when her commission check cleared. I transferred the money. Friday came and went. The money did not come back. When I asked her about it a week later, she laughed it off, saying she bought me dinner last month, so we were basically even. I let it slide. It was just $200. I did not want to be petty, but that was the crack in the dam. $200 became a $500 utility bill because she forgot to mail the check. Then it was $1,000 for car repairs because she needed her vehicle to get to client meetings. Then it was rent because she was between jobs. The requests always came with a frantic urgency. It was always a crisis. If I did not help, she would be evicted. If I did not help, her credit would be ruined. If I did not help, I was heartless. My mother Diane and my father Rick were the enablers who greased the wheels of this machine. They would call me with soft, worried voices. They would say that Kendra was going through a rough patch. They would say that family supports family. They never asked me to give them money directly in those early days. They just asked me to help my sister, and I did. I transferred funds by Zelle. I wrote checks. I swiped my credit card for temporary expenses. The tragedy was not just the money, it was the story they told afterwards. After I paid Kendra's rent for 3 months straight during one of her sabbaticals, I went to a 4th of July barbecue at my parents' house. I was standing by the potato salad holding a paper plate when I heard my mother talking to a neighbor. The neighbor was complimenting Kendra's new car. My mother smiled, beaming with pride, and said that they were so glad Kendra was doing well enough to help me out. She told the neighbor that Quinn Mai had been struggling a bit with the new house, and it was such a blessing that Kendra was successful enough to support the family. I froze. The plastic fork in my hand nearly snapped. I looked across the yard. Kendra was holding court by the cooler, laughing, wearing a designer dress that I knew for a fact was charged to a credit card I was currently paying off. She looked at me, raised her drink, and winked. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march over there and shout the truth, but I didn't. I stayed silent because I had been trained to believe that making a scene was a sin. I had been conditioned to believe that preserving the family image was more important than my own dignity. Later that night on the drive home, Ethan asked the question he had asked a dozen times before. He kept his eyes on the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He asked if they were ever going to pay me back. I looked out the window at the passing street lights of Willowbriar. I felt a sick, heavy stone in my stomach. I told him that they would. I said it was just a loan. I said they were good for it. Every time I said those words, I felt like I was hypnotizing myself. I was trying to manifest a reality that did not exist. I was financing a fantasy where my family was honorable and I was loved for who I was, not for what I could provide. The most painful cut, the one that truly festered, happened involving my father. Rick was a man of traditional values, or so he claimed. He drove a heavy-duty pickup truck that he used for his contracting business last winter. The transmission blew out. He sat at my kitchen table, head in his hands, looking smaller and older than I had ever seen him. He told me he didn't have the liquidity to fix it. He said he would lose a contract if he couldn't get to the site. I couldn't stand to see him like that. I wrote a check for $3,200. I handed it to him. He hugged me. He had tears in his eyes. He thanked me and promised to pay me back as soon as the job was finished. 2 weeks later, I was at the gas station filling up my tank. My father was at the pump on the other side, talking to one of his hunting buddies. He didn't see me. The buddy asked him how he managed to afford the repairs on the truck so quickly. My father laughed, a loud booming laugh. He slapped the side of his truck and said that business was booming. He said he had plenty of cash stashed away for rainy days because he was smart with his money. Then he added the kicker. He said he even had to slip me a few $100 recently because my job wasn't paying what it used to. I stood there, the gas nozzle cold in my hand, feeling the blood drain from my face. He had taken my money, my hard-earned savings, and used it to fix his truck. And in return, he had sold my reputation to buy himself an ego boost. He painted me as the failure so he could look like the provider. I got in my car and drove away without saying a word. I cried the whole way home, not because of the money, but because I finally understood the transaction. I was purchasing their love, but the currency they were paying me back with was humiliation. I tried to stop. I really did. I would tell myself that this was the last time, but then the guilt would come. Kendra would call, crying. My mother would call, sighing. They knew exactly where to press. They knew my deepest fear was being called ungrateful. They weaponized my childhood. They reminded me of the piano lessons they paid for when I was 10. They reminded me of the braces I had when I was 12. They tallied up the cost of raising me and held it over my head like a sword. If I said no, I was abandoning them. If I said no, I was forgetting where I came from. So I kept paying. I became an authorized user on credit cards that I never carried in my wallet. I co-signed loans that I was told were just formalities. I built a financial prison around myself, brick by brick, while they held the mortar. Ethan watched this happen with a growing quiet fury. He stopped coming to Sunday dinners. He stopped laughing at Kendra's jokes. He focused on our son, protecting him from the dynamic that was consuming me. He told me once very gently that I was setting myself on fire to keep them warm, and they were complaining about the smoke. By the time my 30th birthday approached, the dynamic had shifted into something even more aggressive. Kendra wasn't just asking for help anymore. She was demanding tribute. She started taking credit for things she had no part in. She told people she helped me get my job at Crestline. She told people she introduced me to Ethan. She was consuming my identity. When she insisted on throwing me a huge 30th birthday party, my stomach turned. I told her I didn't want it. I told her I just wanted a quiet dinner with Ethan and a few friends. She refused. She said she was handling everything. She said it was her gift to me. I found that strange. Kendra never gave gifts. She only created obligations. As the date approached, I started to see the signs, the hushed conversations between her and my parents, the way they stopped talking when I entered the room, the smirk on Miles's face when he asked me how work was going. They were planning something. I realized then that this party was not about celebrating my 3 decades of life. It was a coronation, but not for me. It was for Kendra. She needed a stage to solidify her power. She needed a large audience to witness her benevolence and my dependence. She wanted to lock me into this role forever. She wanted to publicly brand me as the needy little sister, so that no matter how successful I became at Crestline, no matter how happy I was with Ethan, I would always be beneath her in the social hierarchy of Willowbriar. The invoice they handed me was not just a bill. It was a leash. They thought they were tightening it. They thought that by presenting me with a bill for $20, $8,000 in front of everyone I knew, they would shame me into submission. They thought I would break down, cry, and accept the narrative that I owed them my life. But they forgot one thing. I work in logistics. I track things for a living. And while they were busy fabricating stories and polishing their egos, I had been busy too. I had been tracking the truth. And standing there in that hole watching them laugh, I realized something that broke my heart and set me free all at once. They didn't love me. They loved having someone to look down on. The sadness washed away, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I wasn't there to celebrate. I was there to settle accounts. And unlike them, I had the real numbers. The unraveling of my family mythology did not begin with a shout or a slam of a door. It began with a mundane email notification on a Tuesday morning, exactly 6 months before my 30th birthday. I was sitting at my desk at Crestline, sipping lukewarm coffee and clearing out my spam folder. My eyes glazed over subject lines promising weight loss and cheap insurance until one stopped me. It was from a national bank, a standard transaction alert. The subject line read, "Thank you for your payment on your auto loan." I frowned. I did not have an auto loan with that bank. My sedan was 4 years old, and I had paid it off in full 18 months ago. I assumed it was a phishing scam, the kind I warned my staff about during weekly security briefings. I hovered my mouse over the sender address, expecting to see a string of gibberish characters. It was legitimate. I logged into my primary banking portal. My heart doing a strange nervous flutter against my ribs. There was no record of a car payment leaving my checking account. I called the number on the back of my debit card. Navigating the automated menu, with the impatience of someone who has a fleet of medical transports to manage. When a representative finally came on the line, I gave her my social security number and asked her to verify if I had any open loans. I expected her to say no. I expected to hang up and go back to my spreadsheets. Instead, she told me that I was the co-borrower on a $25,000 auto loan for a late model SUV. The primary borrower was Kendra Butler. The room seemed to tilt. I asked her to repeat that. I told her there must be a mistake. I told her I had never agreed to co-sign a loan for my sister. The representative, whose voice was professionally detached, pulled up the digital copy of the promissory note. She told me that my electronic signature was on file, dated 14 months ago. I closed my eyes, and a memory surfaced. It was a chaotic afternoon at the dealership. Kendra had been buying a new car because her old one simply wasn't reliable enough for her image. My father had called me asking me to come down just to verify some family details for the dealer. He had said the bank needed a character reference because Kendra was self-employed. I remembered signing a digital pad that the finance manager had thrust at me while my father distracted me with questions about Ethan's job. They had told me it was a reference check. They had made me a co-signer. I asked the representative why I was getting an email now. She explained that the account had been flagged because the previous 3 payments were late, and this recent payment had only brought the account current, not ahead, since I was the co-borrower and my credit score was significantly higher than the primaries. The system had alerted me. I hung up the phone. I sat in my ergonomic office chair, staring at the gray fabric of my cubicle wall. I felt sick. It wasn't just the liability. It was the deception. They had tricked me. My own father had distracted me so my sister could shackle me to her debt. That evening, I did not go straight to the kitchen to start dinner. I went into the home office and shut the door. When Ethan came home, he found me sitting on the floor, surrounded by 3 years of bank statements that I had printed out. I told him everything. I told him about the car loan. I told him about the lie. Ethan did not yell. He did not throw things. He sat down beside me on the carpet and picked up a highlighter. He looked at me with a seriousness that terrified me more than anger would have. He asked me if I was sure that was the only thing. He asked if I was certain they weren't using my name for anything else. That question was the key that unlocked the cage I had been living in. I had always assumed their requests were isolated incidents. I had never looked at the whole picture because I was afraid of what I would see. I spent the next 4 weeks conducting a forensic audit of my own life. I treated my personal finances with the same ruthless scrutiny I applied to Crestine's logistics. I exported data from Zelle, Venmo, PayPal, and my 3 checking accounts. I pulled credit reports from all 3 bureaus. I created a master spreadsheet. I named it simply the ledger. I created columns: date, amount, recipient, reason given, actual outcome. The first thing I noticed was the sheer volume of microtransactions. $20 for gas, $50 for groceries, $40 for a phone bill. Alone, they were negligible together over a period of 5 years. They totaled nearly $8,000. Then there were the loans. I filtered my search history in my text messages. I searched for the phrases "pay you back," "borrow," and "next week." The results were endless. I cross-referenced every text message with a bank transfer. June 12th, request $300. Reason short on utilities. Promise will pay back on the 15th. Status never repaid. August 3rd, request $600. Reason car repair. Promise mom will send you the check next week. Status never repaid. I color-coded the rows. Green for gifts, birthdays, Christmas, legitimate celebrations. Red for loans that were never repaid. Yellow for ambiguous transfers. By the time I reached the bottom of the 2nd year, the screen was bleeding red, but the numbers were only half the story. The text messages were the context that made the numbers cruel. I found a thread from 2 years ago involving my mother, Diane. I had sent Kendra $1,000 to cover a credit card minimum payment because she was crying about her credit score dropping. A week later, I saw photos on social media of Kendra at a winery in Napa Valley. I had texted my mother asking how Kendra could afford a trip if she couldn't pay her bills. My mother's response was preserved on my screen. Quinn, honey, don't say anything. The trip was a gift from a friend. If you bring up the money, you'll embarrass her. Don't tell anyone about the help you gave her. Let's save Kendra's face. Save Kendra's face. That was the operational directive of our family. My bank account was the foundation, but Kendra's ego was the structure we were building. As I dug deeper, I found something that made my blood run cold. There was a recurring monthly transfer of $400 labeled Family Emergency Fund. I stared at it, racking my brain. I vaguely remembered setting it up 18 months ago. My father had a health scare, a false alarm with his heart, and they had convinced me that we needed a communal pot of money for medical co-pays. I had set it to auto-pay, and in the chaos of raising a toddler and working full-time, I had forgotten to cancel it. I checked the destination account. It was a joint savings account my mother managed. I logged into the shared view. My name was still on it from when I was in college, a detail they had likely forgotten. I opened the transaction history for that savings account. The money went in on the first of every month, $400 from me. And on the second or third of every month, money went out, but not to a hospital, not to a pharmacy. The withdrawals were transfers to an account nicknamed Kendra Personal. There were other withdrawals, too. Nail salons, a high-end steakhouse, a liquor store. They were eating my emergency money. They were drinking it. They were painting it on their nails. I needed verification. I needed to be sure I wasn't misinterpreting the data due to my own rising anger. I hired a freelance accountant, a man named David, who worked with small businesses in Denver. I redacted the names but gave him the raw data. I asked him to look for patterns. He got back to me in 3 days. We met over a video call. He looked uncomfortable. He told me that, in his professional opinion, this wasn't just poor money management. He said it looked like a classic pass-through scheme. He pointed out the timing. Almost every significant transfer from my account to Kendra's or my parents' accounts was followed within 48 hours by a luxury purchase or a leisure expense. He highlighted one specific sequence. I had transferred $2,000 for urgent taxes. 3 days later, Kendra posted a photo of a new designer handbag. The price of that specific bag was $1,950. The correlation was 99%. I sat back in my chair. The sadness I expected to feel wasn't there. Instead, I felt a cold, hard resolve. It was the same feeling I got when a vendor tried to overcharge Crestline. I stopped seeing them as my mother, my father, and my sister. I started seeing them as bad actors, liabilities. He even asked me what I wanted to do. He asked if I wanted to confront them at Sunday dinner. I shook my head. If I confronted them now with just my anger and a few spreadsheets, they would gaslight me. They would call me paranoid. They would cry. My mother would clutch her chest. Kendra would storm out. They would spin the story. So I was the villain who attacked them over a few dollars. I needed more than the truth. I needed leverage. I decided then that I would not use emotion. I would use the law. I asked around for recommendations, specifically avoiding anyone in Willowbriar who might play golf with my father. A colleague at Crestline recommended a firm in the next county over. She said there was a woman there named Natalie Granger who specialized in contract, disputes, and family law, and who had a reputation for being surgically precise. I made the appointment for a Thursday afternoon. I took a half day off work telling my assistant I had a dentist appointment. Natalie's office was modern, quiet, and smelled of expensive paper. She listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. I showed her the emails, the co-signed loan documents, the recurring transfers, and the text messages. She looked over her glasses at me. She asked what my goal was. She asked if I wanted to sue them. I told her I wanted to be free. I told her I wanted to sever the financial umbilical cord so thoroughly that it could never be reattached, and I told her I wanted them to admit it. Natalie nodded. She told me that we had enough for a civil suit based on unjust enrichment and fraud, specifically regarding the car loan where I was misled about the nature of the document, but she warned me that legal action would burn the bridge permanently. I told her the bridge was already burning. I was just the one paying for the gasoline. She advised me to wait. She told me to gather every last scrap of paper. She told me to let them continue their behavior for a little longer to document the current asks to prove the pattern was ongoing. That was when the invitation from my 30th birthday party arrived. Kendra texted me, "We're going to throw you the biggest bash ever. I'm handling everything. Don't worry about a thing." I looked at the phone. I looked at the spreadsheet where I had tracked thousands of dollars flowing from my labor to her leisure. I texted back, "That sounds great. Thanks, Kendra." I knew what she was doing. She was setting the stage for another performance. She was going to use my birthday to cement her status as the generous sister. I looked at Natalie. I told her I had a deadline. I told her that in 6 months on the night of my birthday, I wanted to present them with a counter offer. Natalie smiled, a sharp, dangerous thing. She pulled a legal pad toward her. She said that if we were going to do this, we were going to do it right. We weren't just going to bring a lawsuit. We were going to bring a reckoning. I walked out of her office into the bright Colorado sunlight. My phone buzzed. It was a request from my father on Venmo. "Need 50 for gas. Card acting up." I declined the request. Then I sent a text. "Sorry, Dad. Cash is tight this week." It was the first lie I had told them in years, and it felt wonderful. The investigation was over. The preparation had begun. As the date of the party drew closer, the atmosphere in Willowbriar shifted. It was subtle at first, like the drop in pressure before a thunderstorm. I would walk into the local grocery store and catch a neighbor watching me with a look of pity mixed with judgment. A cousin I had not spoken to in months commented on my social media post about a work promotion, writing simply, "Must be nice to have so much support getting there." Kendra was busy. She was not just planning a party. She was curating the narrative. She was planting seeds in the minds of our extended family, ensuring that when the curtain rose on my 30th birthday, the audience would view me through a specific lens. The narrative she was crafting was intricate in her version of reality. I was the struggling younger sister who had stumbled through her 20s, buoyed only by the silent, sacrificial generosity of the Butler family. She was painting herself as the matriarch in waiting, the one who had quietly cleaned up my messes. It was brilliant in a sick sort of way. By accusing me of exactly what she was doing to me, she was inoculating herself against the truth. If I complained about money, I would look like the ungrateful leech she had already described. My mother, Diane, was the first to reinforce the perimeter. She called me on a Wednesday evening while I was folding laundry. Her voice was soft, practically dripping with that weaponized maternal concern that makes you question your own sanity. She told me she had heard I was asking questions about old bank transfers. She did not ask why. She just sighed, a long weary sound that traveled down the phone line and wrapped around my throat. She said, "That family is not a ledger." She told me that Kendra was sensitive right now, dealing with so much pressure from her design business. She asked me to just yield to my sister a little bit. I held the phone tight against my ear. Yield. That was the word she always used. But in the Butler dictionary, yield did not mean compromise. It meant pay. It meant silence. It meant accepting the role of the supporting character so Kendra could shine. I asked my mother if yielding meant forgetting that I paid her mortgage last winter. There was a pause. Then my mother's voice turned brittle. She said I was twisting things. She said I should be grateful that we were a family that helped each other, implying that I was the one who had needed the help. 2 hours later, my father, Rick, entered the chat. He did not call. He sent a text message. It was a photo of a rusted bicycle I had when I was 7 years old. Below it, he wrote, "Found this in the garage. Remember how happy you were when I bought this. We don't count pennies in this house, Quinn. We just give." It was gaslighting, pure and simple. But then 5 minutes later, another text arrived. It was a list, a literal list typed out in the Notes app and screenshotted. Times we helped Quinn. 1. College textbook sophomore year. 2. Used Honda Civic sold at discount. 3. Wedding reception, wine gift. He was telling me they did not count pennies while simultaneously presenting me with an itemized receipt of my existence. He was reminding me that I owed them not money, but allegiance. He was building the foundation for the invoice I knew was coming. Then came the invitation to the slaughter. Kendra called me, her voice bubbling with excitement. She wanted to finalize the details for the party. She told me she had booked the Briar Rose Hall. She said she had hired a DJ. She said she was handling the catering. I asked her how much it was costing. I asked her if she needed a deposit. She laughed. She said it was her treat. She said she was taking care of everything because I deserved a night to feel special. I stared at the wall of my kitchen. Kendra had never bought me a cup of coffee without asking me to Venmo her for half. The idea that she was dropping thousands of dollars on a party for me was a mathematical impossibility, unless the party was not a gift, unless the party was an investment. Ethan watched me pace the living room that night. He was the only person who saw the toll this was taking. He suggested we cancel. He said we could go to the mountains for the weekend, turn off our phones and let them have their party in an empty room. He said I did not have to walk into the line of fire. I shook my head. I told him that if I ran away, they won. If I didn't show up, Kendra would spin my absence into another tragedy where she was the victim. She would cry to the guests that she tried so hard to do something nice for her difficult sister, and I had snubbed her. It would cement the lie forever. I told Ethan I had to go. I had to let them spring the trap so I could dismantle it from the inside, but I was not going in unarmed. I met with Natalie Granger again. We sat in her conference room, the air conditioning humming a low, steady note. Natalie was the opposite of my family. She dealt in facts and hard copies and in statutes of limitations. She gave me strict instructions for the night of the party. She told me that when they made their move, and we both knew they would, I was not to scream. I was not to cry. I was not to engage in it, he said. She said argument about feelings. She said that feelings are debatable, but dates are not. She told me to stick to the timeline. So I spent the nights leading up to my birthday building what I called the clean file. It was not just the spreadsheet anymore. I went into the attic and dug through boxes of old paperwork I had saved from college in my early 20s. I found old lease agreements. I found birthday cards where they had written I owe you instead of enclosing cash. I printed out emails from my work server that dated back 5 years. I organized everything into that thick black binder. Section 1, the car loan fraud. Section 2, the emergency siphon. Section 3, the rent subsidies. I was building a wall of evidence so high that they could not climb over it. And then on a Thursday night, 3 days before the party, I found the smoking gun. I was going through a digital folder on an old external hard drive, looking for a receipt for a laptop I had bought for Kendra years ago. I opened a folder labeled Condo Docs 4 years ago. Kendra had tried to buy a condo. She needed a bridge loan for the down payment because her assets were tied up in investments that I later learned were just clothes and vacations. She had begged me for $5,000. She swore it was just for 2 weeks until her settlement check came through. I had given it to her, but because it was a significant amount of money from me at the time, and because I was applying for my own mortgage and needed to explain the large withdrawal to my underwriter, I had made her sign a document. It was a standard promissory note. I had downloaded a template from the internet. It stated clearly that Quinn Butler was lending Kendra Butler $5,000 to be repaid in full by a specific date. It included a clause that failure to repay would result in interest accruing. I had completely forgotten about it. The money was never repaid. When I asked about it back then, Kendra had cried and said the condo deal fell through and she lost the money and fees. I had felt bad for her. I had let it go, but there it was on my screen, a PDF signed Kendra Butler, dated 4 years ago. I opened the metadata. The file had not been modified since the day it was created. This was not an implied loan. This was not family helping family. This was a legal contract, and she had defaulted. I stared at her signature. It was looped and flourished, confident and careless. She had signed it thinking I would never use it. She thought her little sister was too soft, too desperate for approval to ever hold her accountable. I printed 3 copies. I put the original in a fireproof safe. I realized then exactly what the invoice at the party was going to be. Kendra knew I was making good money now. She knew I was stable. She probably sensed that I was pulling away. The $28,000 invoice she was planning to present wasn't just a humiliation tactic. It was a preemptive strike. She wanted to establish a public debt. She wanted to define the history of our financial relationship before I could. She wanted to make it look like I owed her so that if I ever tried to cut her off or ask for my money back, she could point to the invoice and say we were just settling up. It was a masterclass in manipulation. I closed the binder. The snap of the ring sounded like a judge's gavel. I looked at the pile of evidence. It was cold. It was clinical. It was devastating. I thought about the little girl I used to be, the one who just wanted her big sister to play with her. I thought about the teenager who worked double shifts to buy her dad a Father's Day gift, only to have him critique the wrapping paper. I thought about the woman I was now, the one who checked her bank account with a sense of dread every time her phone rang. They had trained me to be their banker, their emotional punching bag, and their audience. They thought my 30th birthday would be the gala performance of that dynamic. I put the binder in my tote bag. I walked into the kitchen where Ethan was feeding our son dinner. The domestic scene was so normal, so peaceful that it made my chest ache. I kissed Ethan on the cheek. I told him we were going to the party. He looked at me worried. He asked if I was ready. I looked at the calendar on the fridge. 72 hours until the party. I told him I was done playing a role. I told him that for 30 years I had been the daughter they wanted me to be. But on Saturday night, I was going to introduce them to the stranger who had been paying their bills. I was not going there to celebrate. I was going there to resign. The Friday morning before the party was not a time for sentiment. It was a time for execution. I sat in Natalie Gruzz's conference room, watching the dust motes dance in the shaft of light cutting across the mahogany table. The air smelled of stale coffee and laser printer toner. It was the scent of impending litigation. Natalie slid a document across the table toward me. It was a single page printed on heavy bond paper. The letterhead was embossed, sharp and intimidating. It was the demand letter. She told me to read it carefully. She said this was not a diary entry. She said it was a declaration of war. I read the text. It was stripped of all the familial, guilt and emotional baggage that had weighed me down for a decade. It was purely transactional. It stated that Kendra Butler, and by extension my parents, as donors, were in default on a series of financial obligations. It listed the $25,000 auto loan. It listed the $5,000 bridge loan with the signed promissory note. It listed the unauthorized withdrawals from the joint savings account totaling $9,600 over 3 years. Natalie tapped the paper with her pen. She told me that we did not need to list every single tank of gas or grocery run. She said that if we included the petty cash, they would argue that I was being stingy. She said we needed to focus on the felonies and the breaches of contract. She said we only needed enough to prove that the financial flow went in one direction and that it was not a gift. I nodded. It made sense. If I asked for the $40 I spent on pizza in 2019, I looked petty. If I asked for the 30 grand in loans they had tricked me into, I looked like a creditor. I spent the rest of the afternoon at my dining room table assembling the physical weapon I would bring to the Briar Rose Hall. I had bought a new binder. It was 3 and thick, black, and utterly devoid of personality. I organized the evidence into what I called sectors. Sector 1 was the wedding. Kendra's wedding to Miles had been a lavish affair that they could not afford. I had paid for the catering deposit and the open bar under the guise of a temporary hole on my credit card. I had the emails from Kendra promising that Miles's bonus would cover it the following week. That was 4 years ago. I highlighted the date of the email and the date of the credit card statement in neon yellow. Sector 2 was the housing. This section contained the promissory note for the condo down payment, along with a print out of the Zelle transfer history labeled Rent Help. Sector 3 was the car. This was the thickest section. It contained the loan agreement, the payment history, and the affidavit I had sworn out stating I was misled about the nature of the signing. I did not just put the papers in plastic sleeves. I annotated them. I used sticky notes. I wrote in thick black marker loan, promised repayment date, default. I wrote it in language simple enough that even my great-aunt Ida, who refused to wear her reading glasses, would understand at a glance. I wanted to make sure that if anyone opened this book, they would not see a confusing jumble of numbers. They would see a story of theft. Ethan sat across from me, a red pen in his hand. We were conducting a final audit of the audit. He slid a page back to me. It was a receipt for a designer coat I had bought my mother 2 Christmases ago. He told me to take it out. I argued. I told him she had practically forced me to buy it, crying in the store until I swiped my card. Ethan shook his head. He said it was a gift. He said she manipulated May. Yes, but I had handed it to her wrapped in paper. He said if I included that, I lost the moral high ground. He told me to keep the list clean. He said we were not there to be mean. We were there to be right. I removed the receipt. He was right. The binder had to be bulletproof. It had to be undeniable. It had to separate the nice sister acts from the financial abuse acts. Once the binder was sealed, I turned to the digital front. I'd opened my laptop and logged into my banking portal. My heart was hammering, but my fingers were steady. I went to the security settings. I changed every password to a random string of alphanumeric characters generated by a security app. And I went to the security questions. What is your mother's maiden name? I deleted Milla. I typed in a nonsense word that had no connection to my family history. They knew my mother's maiden name. They knew the name of my first pet. They knew the street I grew up on. I had to scrub my digital identity of the people who had created it. Then came the hardest click. I navigated to the recurring transfers tab. There it was. Family Emergency Fund $400. Frequency monthly. Next transfer scheduled Monday. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I knew what would happen if I clicked cancel. My mother would get a notification. She would call. She would ask if there was a glitch. I realized that if I canceled it now, they would know something was up before the party. They might corner me. They might change their plan. But then I thought about the nail salon charges on that account. I thought about the liquor store receipts. I clicked cancel series. I did not stop there. I went to the external transfer list and removed my parents' and Kendra's saved account information. I burned the digital bridges. I did not send a text. I did not offer an explanation. I let the silence speak for me. If they noticed before Saturday night, I would just claim ignorance. I would say I was switching banks. I would lie just like they had lied to me for a decade. The next morning, the day before the party, I met Natalie for coffee at a place 2 towns over. She was dressed in casual clothes, jeans, and a blazer, looking less like a shark and more like a civilian. She handed me the physical envelope containing the demand letter. It was heavy. She told me the plan. She would arrive at the party separately. She would not sit with me. She would sit at a table near the back, ostensibly as a work friend who had been invited out of courtesy. She would drink club soda and watch. She told me that she would only intervene if things went legal, if they tried to physically detain me, or if they tried to destroy my property. Otherwise, she was just a witness. She said her presence was the nuclear option. Once she stood up and identified herself as my counsel. The family relationship was effectively dead. I told her it had been dead for a long time. We were just waiting for the coroner to call it. Then 6 hours before the party, the final twist arrived. I was at home steaming the dress I planned to wear. My phone buzzed. It was a message from my cousin Sarah. Sarah was not malicious, just gossipy and not particularly bright. She had forwarded me a screenshot from a group chat I was not a part of. The group was titled The Big 3 and Zero Surprise. The screenshot showed a photo that Kendra had posted to the group. It was a photo of the invoice she planned to give me, the $28,000 bill. Below the photo, Kendra had written, "Can you believe she actually thinks she's the one supporting us? I'm going to give her this tonight as a joke to knock her down a peg. It's going to be hilarious. Make sure you guys laugh when she opens it so she knows we're all in on it." My blood ran cold, then hot. She was priming the audience. She was not just planning to humiliate me. She was actively recruiting accomplices. She was directing the scene, telling them when to laugh, framing my shock as arrogance that needed to be checked. She was telling them that I was the one with the delusion that I supported them. She was flipping the reality before I even walked in the door. She was making sure that if I tried to defend myself, the room would already view me as a narcissist who needed a reality check. I looked at the phone. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It was the calm of a sniper who has just adjusted for windage. I realized I did not need to be witty. I did not need to be charming. I did not need to win them over with a speech. Kendra was bringing a joke. She was bringing a prop. I looked at the black binder on the counter. I texted Sarah back. Thanks for the heads up. See you tonight. I turned to Ethan, who was buttoning his shirt. I showed him the screenshot. He read it. His jaw tightened. He asked if I still wanted to go. I smoothed the front of my dress. I picked up the binder and slid it into my tote bag. It fit perfectly, heavy and dense next to the envelope Natalie had given me. I told him that I absolutely wanted to go. I said that Kendra wanted to talk about numbers. I said she wanted to talk about who supported whom. I told him that was fine. I said I was going to show them the data. I checked my reflection in the mirror. I did not look like the little sister anymore. I looked like an auditor. I walked out to the car. The sun was setting over Willow Briar, casting long, sharp shadows across the driveway. The 72-hour countdown was about to begin, but in my mind, the clock had already stopped. It was time to open the books. The air in the Briar Rose Hall was thick with a specific kind of cruelty that tries to pass itself off as humor. Kendra stood on the slightly elevated platform, the microphone in one hand, the other hand gesturing benevolently toward me as if she were a saint forgiving the sinner. She had just delivered her punchline, the invoice for $28,000, and the room was eating it up. She looked radiant in her silver dress, her face flushed with the dopamine hit of public validation. She spoke into the microphone, her voice trembling with faux emotion. She said that she hoped this would be a wake-up call for me. She said that sometimes the most loving thing a sister can do is hold up a mirror. She looked at our cousins, at the neighbors, at the friends I had grown up with, and she smiled. They smiled back. They nodded. They were the chorus in her tragedy, and I was the villain. I stood there holding the cream-colored card stock. The number at the bottom was printed in bold, sans serif font, $28,000. I looked at the itemized list again. It was a masterpiece of revisionist history. Rent assistance 2015, used car transfer 2017. I lifted my head and looked directly at Kendra. The room went quiet, expecting my tears. They were waiting for the breakdown. They were waiting for me to storm out or to beg for forgiveness. Instead, I took a step closer to her. I asked her, my voice calm enough to be picked up by the microphone she was still holding near her chest, if she wanted me to settle this balance. I asked if the purpose of this gift was for me to pay her back, right here, right now, in front of everyone. Kendra blinked. This was not in the script, but she recovered quickly. She saw an opportunity to double down. She nodded vigorously, her earrings catching the light. She said yes. She said that to be an adult, one must clear their ledger. She said it was only fair. She used the word fair. It hung in the air like a target. I nodded slowly. I said that I agreed. I said that if we were going to be fair, we had to be thorough. I turned to the table behind me, where my large tote bag was sitting next to the untouched birthday cake. I reached inside. My hand closed around the spine of the black 3-in binder I had assembled with forensic precision over the last 48 hours. I pulled it out. It was heavy. It landed on the table with a dull, authoritative thud that vibrated through the floorboards. The sound was distinct. It was the sound of a gavel. I unbuckled the strap. I opened the cover. I told her that I brought my invoice too. I did not scream it. I did not shout. I said it with the casual tone of a waitress dropping a check. I flipped past the first divider. I turned the binder around so it faced Kendra, but I angled it enough that Miles, who was standing just behind her, could see it clearly. I pointed to the summary page. The total at the bottom was highlighted in yellow. It was not $28,000. It was $112,45,063. Kendra stared at the page. Her smile froze, then fractured. She squinted as if the numbers were in a foreign language. She asked what this was. She tried to laugh, but it came out as a dry, choking sound. She said I was being ridiculous. I did not look at her. I looked at Miles. Miles was a simple man, a man who liked football and craft beer and trusting his wife, but he was also a man who knew what a bank statement looked like. His eyes were locked on the page. He was reading the line items. Bridge loan for condo, down payment $5,000. Status unpaid. Auto loan cosign payoff $25,000. Status involuntary payment, unauthorized withdrawal. Joint savings $9,600. Miles looked up. His face had drained of all color. He looked at Kendra. He asked her, his voice cutting through the silence of the room, where I got those numbers. He pointed to the condo line. He asked her why it said I paid the down payment. He said she told him that money came from her commission bonus. Kendra's eyes darted around the room. The audience was watching. The camera phones were still recording, but the mood had shifted. The laughter had evaporated, replaced by a confused, heavy tension. Kendra tried to cover the microphone. She whispered loudly that I was just making things up to ruin the party. She tried to reach for the binder to close it. I slapped her hand away. It was a reflex. It was sharp. I told her not to touch the evidence. Then I reached into the pocket of the binder and pulled out the stapled packets I had prepared for my parents. I walked off the stage and approached the head table where Diane and Rick were sitting. They looked paralyzed. My mother was holding a napkin to her mouth. My father was gripping his butter knife. I placed the packets in front of them. I told them that I knew they had seen Kendra's invoice. I told them that I knew they had helped her write it. I pointed to the document on top of my father's stack. It was a print out of the text message where he asked me for $3,000 for his truck, followed by the bank transfer receipt, followed by the text where he told his friend he had given me money. I asked him if he remembered that day. I asked him if he remembered crying at my kitchen table. My father looked down at the paper. He could not look me in the eye. His bravado, the swagger of the patriarch who provided for everyone, dissolved instantly. He looked old. He looked court. My mother tried to speak. She started to say that this was not the place. She started to use her soft, weaponized voice to tell me I was making a scene. I cut her off. I pointed to the page in her packet that showed the withdrawals from the emergency fund matched with the dates of her spa trips. I asked her if the emergency was a pedicure. The room was deathly silent now. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the rustle of paper. The guests, the cousins, the aunts, the friends were exchanging looks. They were realizing that they had been laughing at the wrong person. The narrative was collapsing in real time. Kendra saw her control slipping. She grabbed the microphone again. She shouted that this was fake. She screamed that I was jealous. She tried to rally the crowd. She said I was trying to humiliate her on her stage. That was the cue. Natalie Granger stood up. She had been sitting at table 9 near the back, blending in with the wall. But when she stood, she dominated the room. She picked up her clutch and walked toward the front. She moved with the lethal grace of a predator who has stopped stalking and started hunting. She stopped next to me. She did not look at the guests. She looked directly at Kendra. She spoke clearly, her voice projected without the need for a microphone. She said that she was legal counsel for Quinn Butler. A gasp rippled through the room. Someone dropped a fork. Natalie reached into her bag and pulled out the heavy sealed envelope. She placed it on the table next to the birthday cake, right on top of Kendra's ridiculous invoice. She said that the documents in the binder were not fake. She said they were exhibits A through Z of a civil complaint for fraud, breach of contract, and unjust enrichment. Kendra looked at the envelope. She looked at Natalie. She shrank. The big sister persona vanished, leaving behind a frightened court child. Natalie continued. She said that every loan listed in the binder was backed by a digital footprint. She said the promissory notes were valid. She said the co-signed loan was a matter of bank record. She looked at Miles, then at my parents. She said that this was not a family squabble. She said it was a financial investigation. Then she delivered the ultimatum. She said they had 72 hours to respond to the demand letter. She said that if a settlement plan was not agreed upon by Tuesday at 5:00, she would be filing the suit with the county clerk. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10. This was not social drama. This was legal ruin. Miles looked at the binder again. He looked at Kendra. He backed away from her, physically creating distance between himself and his wife. It was a small step, but it was a chasm. I looked at the room one last time. I saw my cousin Sarah, phone lowered, mouth open. I saw the neighbors who had judged me. I saw my family. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel happy. I felt exhausted. But for the first time in my life, I felt clean. The secret was out. The lie was dead. I looked at Kendra. She was trembling. She had the microphone in her hand, but she had nothing left to say. I told her that the singing was over. I turned to Ethan. He was standing by the door, holding my coat. He looked proud. He looked ready. I walked over to him and took his hand. I did not say goodbye to my parents. I did not apologize to the guests for ruining the party. I did not offer any explanations. I said simply that we were leaving. We walked out of the double doors of the Briar Rose Hall. The silence from the room followed us all the way to the parking lot behind us. I knew the explosion was coming. I knew the screaming would start the moment the door clicked shut. I knew Miles would start asking questions that Kendra could not answer. But I did not look back. I got into the car, buckled my seat belt, and watched the lights of the venue fade in the rear-view mirror. The 72-hour clock had started, and I was finally driving my own car. The sun came up over Willow Briar the next morning with an indifference that felt almost insulting. The sky was a perfect cloudless blue, the kind that usually signals a lazy Sunday. But inside my house, the atmosphere was anything but lazy. It was electric with the fallout of a nuclear detonation. I had turned my phone on silent before I went to bed, a small mercy I had granted myself after the adrenaline crash of the night before. When I picked it up from the nightstand at 7:00 in the morning, the screen was a wall of notifications. There were 43 missed calls. There were 68 text messages. They were not messages of concern. They were not apologies. They were missiles. I sat on the edge of the bed, Ethan still asleep beside me, and scrolled through the preview screen. The names Diane, Rick, and Kendra cycled over and over again like a glitch in the system. My mother's texts were frantic streams of consciousness. She asked how I could do this to them. She asked if I had any idea how embarrassed my father was. She said I had destroyed the family name over a few dollars. She did not mention the theft. She did not mention the lies. She only mentioned the optics to Diane Butler. The sin was not stealing from her daughter. The sin was letting the neighbors know about it. My father was more direct. He sent short, angry commands. Call me now. You need to fix this. You need to tell everyone you were drunk or confused. He wanted a retraction. He wanted me to fall on my sword one last time to protect his ego. Then there was Kendra. Her messages were a manic mix of rage and victimhood. She called me a psychopath. She said I had ruined her marriage. She said I was jealous of her happiness and had planned this ambush to steal her spotlight. I did not feel the urge to call them back. I did not feel the familiar pull of guilt that used to send me scrambling to apologize for things I had not done. That part of me had died in the Briar Rose Hall. I opened the family group chat, the one they had used to coordinate potlucks and holiday gifts. I typed a single message. From this point forward, I will not be answering calls or text messages regarding financial matters or the events of last night. All communication must be sent via email to me and copied to my attorney, Natalie Granger. I will be archiving everything. I hit send. Then I left the group. The reaction was immediate. My phone started buzzing in my hand, a physical vibration of their panic. I set it down on the dresser and walked out of the room. I went to the kitchen and made coffee. The ritual of grinding beans and boiling water felt grounding. Ethan walked in a few minutes later, his hair messy, looking weary. He asked if they were awake. I told him they had never gone to sleep. As I poured the coffee, a new text popped up on my screen. It was Kendra messaging me individually since I had left the group. The tone had shifted completely. The rage was gone, replaced by a wheedling, gaslighting dismissal. She wrote that I was taking everything too seriously. She said the invoice she gave me was just a joke. She said it was a gag gift, like over-the-hill balloons. She asked why I couldn't take a joke. I stared at the words, just a joke. I realized then that this was their ultimate defense mechanism. Whenever their cruelty went too far, whenever their exploitation caused actual damage, they rebranded it as humor. If I was hurt, it was because I lacked a sense of humor. If I was angry, it was because I was too stiff. They had spent my entire life punching me and then telling me to laugh at the bruise. I did not reply. I took a screenshot of the text and emailed it to Natalie with the subject, Lime, admission of knowledge regarding the invoice. by calling it a joke. She admitted she gave it to me. She couldn't claim later that she didn't know about it. I spent the next 2 hours locking down the perimeter of my life. I called my bank again. I spoke to the fraud department. I told them to place a verbal password on my account, something that no one in my family could guess. I told them to flag any transaction that originated from a third-party transfer service. I went through my recurring payments one last time. I found a subscription for a streaming service that I didn't use. I checked the user profile. It was Rick's email. I canceled it. I found a membership to a wholesale club under my name that had a secondary card holder listed as Kendra. I called and revoked her card. I was scrubbing the barnacles off the hull of my ship. Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop. He had been quiet for a long time. Then he looked up and asked me when I had last checked my credit report. I told him I had checked it a month ago when I started the investigation. He turned the laptop around so I could see the screen. He had logged into a credit monitoring service we shared. He pointed to a section labeled Recent Inquiries. There was a hard inquiry dated just 3 days ago. It was from a leasing company for luxury vehicles. I felt the blood drain from my face. 3 days ago, while Kendra was planning my birthday party, while she was printing out that fake invoice to humiliate me, she was applying for a lease on a new car. And she had used my social security number. I knew she had used mine because her credit was shot. She must have assumed that since I had co-signed for her before, I wouldn't notice another inquiry. Or maybe she thought she could bully me into signing the paperwork later, framing it as another emergency because she needed a car to look successful for her clients. I told Ethan to print it. I told him to add it to the file. This wasn't just past behavior. It was an active crime scene. At noon, my phone buzzed with a message that made me pause. It was not from my parents. It was not from Kendra. It was from Miles. I didn't know. I swear to God, Quinn, I didn't know. I need to talk to you. Please, just 5 minutes. I showed the message to Ethan. He frowned. He asked if I trusted him. I thought about Miles. He was a follower. He was a man who liked the path of least resistance. He loved Kendra, or at least he loved the version of Kendra she presented to the world. I had seen his face last night. That was not the face of a co-conspirator. That was the face of a man watching his life burn down. I texted him back. I told him I would meet him at the coffee shop near the highway in 30 minutes. I told him to come alone. I did not invite him to my house. My house was a fortress now. No one from that side of the family was allowed across the threshold. When I walked into the coffee shop, Miles was already there. He was sitting at a small table in the corner, staring into a black coffee. He looked like he hadn't slept. His shirt was wrinkled and he hadn't shaved. I sat down opposite him. I did not smile. I kept my bag with the binder inside on my lap. He looked up at me. His eyes were red. He started to speak, but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. He told me that Kendra had told him I was the one in trouble. He said that for years, Kendra had told him that I was bad with money, that I made bad investments, and that our parents were constantly bailing me out. He said that when they bought their house, Kendra told him the down payment came from a bonus she got for landing a big commercial design contract. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the copy of the promissory note for the bridge loan. I slid it across the table. I told him that there was no design contract. I told him that I was the bonus. He read the paper. He traced Kendra's signature with his finger. He looked like he was going to be sick. He asked me about the car. He asked about the $28,000 invoice she gave me. I told him the truth. I told him that the invoice was a projection. I told him that everything she accused me of was something she had done to me. I explained the authorized user scams. I explained the guilt trips. Miles put his head in his hands. He said that he had been so proud of her. He said he thought she was a genius businesswoman. He said he had defended her when his own parents asked why they spent so much money. He realized now that he had been living inside a fabrication. He looked up at me, and there was a new hardness in his eyes. He asked me if I was really going to sue them. I told him that the 72-hour clock was ticking. I told him that if they did not present a settlement plan, Natalie would file the paperwork on Tuesday. Miles nodded. He stood up. He did not ask me to stop. He did not ask for mercy. He simply said that he had to go have a conversation with his wife. He thanked me for meeting him. As he walked out, I saw a man who was no longer walking on steady ground. Kendra had not just lost a sister, she was losing her audience. I drove home feeling a strange hollowness. I had expected victory to feel loud. Instead, it felt quiet. It felt like cleaning out a wound, painful, necessary, and sterile. When I got back, I checked my email. There was a voice note attached to an email from my mother. The subject line was just Quinn. I hesitated before clicking play. Ethan squeezed my shoulder. I hit the space bar. My mother's voice filled the room. She was crying. It was the wet, ragged sound of a woman who knows she has lost control. She said that I was breaking her heart. She said that she had only ever tried to keep the peace. She said that families help each other, and she didn't understand why I was being so cruel. She asked how I could sleep at night knowing I was tearing the family apart. I listened to the whole thing. I listened to the manipulation woven into every sob. She was not crying for me. She was crying for the loss of her resources. She was crying because the ATM had not only stopped dispensing cash but had started dispensing consequences. I hit reply. I typed 2 sentences. I have lost sleep for years wondering how I would pay your bills in my own. Now it is your turn to stay awake. I sent it. Later, that afternoon, my phone pinged with a few notifications from social media. I had not blocked my cousins yet. One of them, a younger cousin named Josh, who had been at the party, sent me a direct message. He wrote that he was sorry. He clapped. He said he didn't know. He said that when I brought out the binder, he realized that something was wrong. He said that what Kendra did was messed up. Then another message came from my Aunt Patty. She was less apologetic, but she was honest. She said that she always wondered how Kendra afforded those vacations. She said she was sorry she hadn't said anything sooner. I did not reply with forgiveness. I did not tell them it was okay. It wasn't okay. Their applause had hurt. Their willingness to believe the worst of me had been a betrayal in itself. But I noted their names. I mentally moved them from the enemy column to the neutral column. I realized then that this was not about revenge. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is about inflicting pain to balance the scales. This was about boundaries. For 30 years, I had allowed them to walk through my life with muddy boots, tracking their chaos and their debt across my floor. I had handed them the keys and thanked them for the privilege. Now I was changing the locks. The 72 hours were not a countdown to a punishment. They were a countdown to an eviction. I was evicting them from my finances. I was evicting them from my conscience. I was evicting them from the power they held over me. I closed my laptop. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the living room. The house was quiet. The phone had finally stopped buzzing, blocked and silenced. For the first time in a decade, I didn't owe anyone anything. And the silence was the most expensive thing I had ever bought. The 72-hour countdown that Natalie Granger had initiated was not just a legal grace period. It was a pressure test. I knew my family well enough to know that they would not spend this time reflecting on their moral failings or scraping together the money they owed me. They would spend it testing the structural integrity of my resolve. They wanted to see if the little sister would fold just like she always had. Day 1 began with a digital white flag that was actually a track. I was sitting at my kitchen island drinking black coffee and watching the sunrise when an email from Kendra landed in my inbox. The subject line was simply, "Let's fix this." I opened it. The text was classic Kendra, a masterful blend of victimization and false equivalency. She wrote that things had gotten out of hand on Saturday night. She admitted that her joke with the invoice might have been in poor taste, but she insisted that my reaction was disproportionate. Then came the offer. She proposed a mutual withdrawal. She would retract her $28,000 invoice, which had no legal standing to begin with. If I agreed to withdraw my demand letter and burn that binder, she said, we could wipe the slate clean, hug it out, and go back to being a family. She called it a truce. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a dry, sharp sound. She was trying to trade a counterfeit bill for a stack of gold bars. She wanted me to trade my documented, signed, and notarized evidence for her promise to stop lying about a debt that never existed. She was treating the truth as a bargaining chip. I did not call her. I did not text her. I forwarded the email to Natalie. Then I hit reply to Kendra. I typed a single sentence. I cannot withdraw the truth, and I do not negotiate with my own history. I hit send. The line in the sand was now a trench. Day 2 brought the first casualty of the war, and it was the one person I had hoped might survive the blast, Radius Miles. He requested another meeting, this time not at a coffee shop, but in the parking lot of a hardware store on the edge of town. It was neutral ground, unglamorous and private. When I pulled up in my sedan, he was leaning against his truck. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years and 48 hours. His eyes were hollowed out, dark circles bruising the skin beneath them. He didn't say hello. He simply reached through the open window of his truck and handed me a manila envelope. He told me that he had gone through the shared computer in his home office. He said he found a folder Kendra thought she had deleted. I opened the envelope. Inside were printouts of emails between Kendra and her best friend, a woman named Jessica, who I had known since high school. The emails were dated 2 weeks prior to my birthday. I read the top page. Kendra had written, "I'm going to teach Quinn a lesson she won't forget. She's been acting so high and mighty lately with her job. I'm going to give her a bill for everything Mom and Dad ever did for her. It'll be hilarious. I need you to leave the laughter when I hand it to her. If everyone laughs, she'll just have to take it." Below that was a list, a literal cast list. Jessica laughed, Aunt Sarah nod and agree. Mom looked disappointed. She had directed the humiliation. She had scripted the abuse. But Miles wasn't done. He pointed to a second document in my hand. It was a bank statement from their joint account dated 4 years ago. It lined up perfectly with the date of the bridge loan I had given Kendra for her condo down payment, the $5,000 she swore she lost when the deal fell through. Miles's voice shook as he spoke. He told me that for 4 years he believed that the down payment on their home had come from his end-of-year bonus. He said Kendra had told him she was moving his bonus into a high-yield savings account to surprise him with the house. He tapped the paper. He said there was no savings account. He said she had spent his bonus on credit card debt he didn't know about, the money that actually secured their home. The cash that closed the deal was my $5,000. The money she claimed was lost. I stared at the numbers. She had stolen from me to cover the fact that she had stolen from him. It was a Ponzi scheme built on familial trust. Miles looked at me, his face crumbling. He asked how she could do that. He asked if everything was a lie. I felt a surge of pity for him, but I pushed it down. Pity was dangerous right now. Pity was what got me into this mess. I told him that he was finding out late, but finding out late was better than never finding out at all. I told him that now he had a choice. He could keep living in the illusion, or he could look at the ledger. He took the papers back, his hands trembling. He told me he was moving into a hotel that night. He said he couldn't look at her without seeing the math. Day 3 was when the desperation truly set in. They realized that the emotional appeals and the truce offers weren't working. They realized that Miles was defecting. So they decided to attack the one thing they knew I valued more than their approval, my career. I was in a meeting with my logistics team at Crestline when the receptionist buzzed my line. Her voice was tight, professional but strained. She told me that my father was in the lobby. She said he was demanding to see me, and he was raising his voice. My stomach dropped. This was the nuclear option. They knew I prided myself on my professionalism. They knew I kept my personal life sealed away from my work. Bringing the drummer to Crestline was a calculated move to embarrass me into submission. I told the receptionist I was coming down. I told her to call security, but to have them stand by, not engage unless I gave the signal. I walked down the hallway, the heels of my shoes clicking on the polished concrete. I felt a cold, hard rage settling in my chest. I walked into the lobby. My father, Rick, was standing near the reception desk. He was wearing his work clothes, dusty from a job site. He looked frantic. When he saw me, he pointed a finger at me. He started shouting before I even reached him. He yelled that I was an ungrateful child. He shouted that I was trying to bankrupt the family. He yelled that I should be ashamed of myself for dragging lawyers into family business. Employees were walking by. Clients were sitting in the waiting area. Everyone was looking 10 years ago. I would have cringed. I would have ushered him outside, apologized, and promised whatever he wanted just to make the noise stop. I would have paid any price for silence. But I was not that woman anymore. I stopped 10 feet away from him. I did not raise my voice. I did not look at the people watching. I looked him dead in the eye. I spoke calmly. I told him that this was a place of business. I told him that if he had a legal response to the demand letter, he should forward it to MS. Granger. He stepped forward, his face turning red. He shouted that I didn't dictate the rules to him. He called me a slur, something ugly and hateful that echoed off the glass walls. I didn't flinch. I turned to the security guard, a man named Marcus who I greeted every morning. I nodded once. Marcus stepped forward. He was 6'4" and built like a linebacker. He placed a hand on my father's shoulder. He told him firmly that it was time to leave. My father looked at Marcus, then at me. He saw the lack of fear in my eyes. He saw that his tantrum was not generating compliance. It was generating a trespassing charge. He spat on the floor. He told me I was dead to him. Then he turned and walked out. I watched him go. I turned to the receptionist and apologized for the disruption. I told her that if he returned, she was to call the police immediately. I went back to my office and closed the door. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone. I realized then that there was no bottom. There was no line they wouldn't cross. They were willing to jeopardize my livelihood, my reputation, and my safety just to keep their control over me. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted a resource. And when the resource stopped producing, they tried to destroy the machine. That afternoon, as the 72-hour deadline approached, the guerrilla warfare began. Kendra, realizing she was losing Miles and that I wasn't cracking, took to the court of public opinion. My phone started lighting up with messages from distant relatives and family friends. Kendra was telling people that I was the one who had scammed her. She was spinning a story that I had managed her finances and embezzled money and that the loans were just me returning what I stole. It was a desperate, nonsensical lie, but lies travel faster than truth. I saw a post on social media where a cousin asked, how could Quinn do that to her own sister? I did not engage in a comment war. I did not write a long defense. I simply opened my digital archive. I found the screenshots of text messages where Kendra begged for money. Text from Kendra 2 years ago. Quinn, please. And desperate. I swear I'll pay you back next week. Just loan me the rent money. I'll sign whatever you want. Text from Kendra 3 years ago. Don't tell Miles I asked. I'll pay you back when the bonus hits. I promise. I sent these screenshots directly to the cousins who were spreading the rumors. I added a simple caption, receipts don't lie, people do. The rumors died within an hour. The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, at 4:55 in the afternoon, 5 minutes before the deadline, Natalie Granger called me. I picked up on the first ring. I asked her if they had settled. Natalie's voice was professional, but I could hear a hint of steel in it. She said they had not settled. She said she had just received a response from an attorney representing Kendra and my parents. They were denying the validity of the debt. They claimed the money was a series of gifts. And then came the kicker. They were threatening to countersue for emotional distress and defamation of character regarding the birthday party. I sat back in my chair. I looked at the view of Willow Briar outside my office window. Most people would have been terrified. A countersue, it sounds scary. It sounds expensive, but I smiled. A genuine calm smile. I told Natalie that was perfect. She asked me why I thought it was perfect. I told her that a lawsuit meant discovery. It meant subpoenas. It meant forensic accounting. It meant that they would have to sit under oath and answer questions about where the money went. It meant they couldn't hide behind family tradition or jokes. I told her that for 30 years they had been playing a game where the rules changed every time I started to win. They moved the goalposts. They rewrote history. But in a courtroom, you cannot gaslight the judge. You cannot cry your way out of a bank statement. I told Natalie to file the papers. I told her I was ready. I said that finally, after all this time, We were going to play by the rules. The transition from a family feud to a legal proceeding is like moving from a wrestling ring into a sterile operating theater. There is no cheering crowd. There is no microphone. There are only bright lights, cold metal, and the dissection of truth. The weeks following the deadline were not filled with screaming matches. They were filled with the quiet, suffocating accumulation of paper. Kendra's attorney, a man who seemed to specialize in bluster over substance, tried to paint the narrative that I was a bitter sibling trying to retroactively convert generous gifts into loans. In his initial filings, he described our family dynamic as communally supportive, a fancy legal phrase for Quinn pays for everything. But the paper trail I had built was a fortress. Every time they claimed a transfer was a gift, Natalie countered with a text message from that same day, promising repayment. Every time they claimed ignorance, we produced an email acknowledgement. However, the true rot at the center of my family was not fully exposed until Natalie called me on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice was different. It lacked the usual professional detachment. She sounded angry. She asked me to come to her office immediately. When I arrived, she had a single document on her desk. It was a scanned copy of a gift letter from the mortgage file for Kendra's condo, the one that eventually fell through, but for which the paperwork had been processed. Natalie spun the paper around. It was a standard form used by lenders to verify that funds given for a down payment are not loans. It requires a signature stating that no repayment is expected. The signature at the bottom was not mine. I had never signed a gift letter. I had signed a promissory note. The signature belonged to my mother, Diane. I stared at the loop of the D. My mother had signed a document certifying that the funds she knew I had loaned Kendra with a contract were actually a gift from the family. She had forged the narrative to the bank to help Kendra qualify. But it was worse than forgery. It was complicit betrayal. I drove to my parents' house. I did not call ahead. I walked up the driveway where I had learned to ride a bike, past the flower beds I used to weed for allowance money I never received. My mother answered the door. She looked tired. When she saw me, her face crumpled into a mask of tragic hope. She thought I was there to apologize. I held up the copy of the letter. I didn't yell. I asked her simply if she knew. She tried to look away. She mumbled that she just wanted Kendra to get the condo. She said Kendra was so happy about the place. I asked the question that had been haunting me since I left Natalie's office. I asked her if she signed it because she believed Kendra would pay me back, or if she signed it because she knew that if Kendra didn't pay, I would just absorb the loss like I always did. My mother looked at me. For a fleeting second, the mask slipped. I saw the calculation in her eyes. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. She had gambled with my financial safety to buy Kendra's happiness, assuming I was too weak to ever call the bluff. I turned around and walked back to my car. She called after me saying I was being hard. She was right. I was becoming as hard as the diamond they had never bought me. The next domino to fall was Miles. Kendra had been counting on Miles to present a united front. She needed him to be the beautiful husband who was shocked by his sister-in-law's cruelty, that I had given Miles the red pill, and he could not go back to the Matrix. He did not just move into a hotel. He hired his own counsel. When the news hit that Miles was filing for legal separation and requesting a forensic accounting of their marital assets, Kendra's defense imploded. She could no longer claim that we were confused by Quinn's demands. There was no way. There was just her standing alone in the spotlight she had craved, but the light was harsh and unforgiving. I heard from a mutual friend that Kendra had a panic attack in a grocery store. She had tried to pay for her groceries and her card was declined, likely because Miles had frozen their joint assets. For the first time in her life, she was experiencing the financial reality she had forced me to live in for a decade. But the final twist, the one that turned the tide completely, was hidden in the fine text of the promissory note I had found on my hard drive, the one for the $5,000 bridge loan. Natalie had been reviewing the boilerplate language of the template I had downloaded years ago. I had chosen it randomly from a legal website, thinking it looked official. I hadn't understood the power of what I was asking Kendra to sign. Natalie pointed to Clause 4, Section B, Security Interest. The The borrower agrees that until the principal and interest are paid in full, this note shall be secured by a lien on the borrower's current or future real property. I stared at the words. Kendra had signed it. She had signed it because she never intended to pay it back, so the words meant nothing to her. She thought it was play acting, but in the state of Colorado, a signed agreement granting a security interest is irrevocable. Natalie looked at me. She told me that we could file a lien against Kendra's house, the house she was currently living in, the house she was terrified of losing because it was the only symbol of status she had left. If we filed the lien, she could not sell the house. She could not refinance. And if we pushed for judgment, we could technically force a sale to satisfy the debt. Kendra must have been informed of this by her lawyer, because that evening my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered. It was Kendra. Her voice was unrecognizable. It was small, broken, and stripped of all the theatricality. She begged. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She just begged. She asked me not to take the house. She said it was all she had. She said Miles was leaving her. She said she was drowning. Then came the offer. She whispered that she would sign whatever I wanted. She said she would pay me back every cent over the next 10 years. She said she would admit she was wrong, but she had one condition. She wanted a non-disclosure agreement. She wanted the settlement to be sealed. She wanted to keep the invoice incident and the lawsuit out of the public record. She wanted to preserve the last shred of her reputation. She told me that I could have the money or I could have the truth, but I couldn't have both. I sat in my living room looking at Ethan playing with our son on the rug. I thought about the years of gaslighting. I thought about the whispers at family gatherings. I thought about the way she had tried to destroy me at my own birthday party. She wanted to buy the shadows back. She wanted to pay me to help her put the mask back on. I told her that I did not want her house. I told her I had my own house, but I told her that I was done negotiating in the dark. I said that the darkness was where she thrived, and I was no longer willing to live there with her. I refused the NDA. I refused the secrecy. I hung up. The fallout from that refusal rippled through the extended family. The camps began to fracture. My cousin Sarah, the one who had been directed to laugh, sent me an email. She had done her own math. She realized that a few years ago, Kendra had borrowed money from her for a bridal shower gift that never materialized. My Aunt Patty remembered a time Kendra claimed I had refused to help with Grandma's medical bills, soliciting donations from the family. She asked me if that was true. I sent her the bank transfer receipt showing I had paid the bills directly to the hospital. The illusion of Kendra the martyr was dissolving, revealing Kendra the grifter. But even with the tide turning, I felt a heavy stone in my chest. My mother was still sending emails, oscillating between guilt and rage, telling me I was a bad daughter. That phrase, bad daughter, had been the boogeyman of my entire adult life. It was the stick they used to beat me into submission. I looked at my son. He was trying to stack blocks into a tower. It kept falling, but he kept trying. I realized that if I capitulated now, if I signed the NDA and let Kendra keep her secrets just to stop the noise, I would be teaching my son that peace is more important than integrity. I would be teaching him that you should let people hurt you if they are related to you. I decided that I didn't care about being a good daughter by their definition. Their definition was a lie. I wanted to be a mother who could look herself in the mirror. I called Natalie. I told her to proceed. Natalie prepared the final motion. It was a summary judgment request. It laid out the timeline in brutal, irrefutable detail. Exhibit A, the request for funds. Exhibit B, the transfer. Exhibit C, the use of funds for luxury items. Forensic tracing. Exhibit D, the defamation, the birthday invoice. Exhibit E, the lien. Natalie sat me down before we submitted it. She warned me. She said that if the judge granted this and if Kendra couldn't pay, which we knew she couldn't, the court could order the seizure of assets. Kendra could lose her home. She could be bankrupt. Natalie asked me if I was prepared to be the person who did that to her sister. I looked at the stack of papers. I thought about the $28,000 invoice Kendra had handed me with a smile. She had tried to bankrupt me emotionally. She had tried to steal my dignity. I told Natalie that I was not trying to destroy Kendra. I didn't want her on the street. I didn't want her to suffer. I looked Natalie in the eye and said the words that had been forming in my mind for weeks. I said that I didn't want to win. I just wanted to stop losing. I wanted the bleeding to stop. And if Kendra had to lose her house to learn that she couldn't spend my life, then that was a lesson she bought for herself. I told Natalie to file the motion. The legal machinery clicked into gear. The deadline for the settlement had passed. The offers were off the table. We were going to court. And for the first time, Kendra would have to stand before a judge who didn't care about her charm, her tears, or her stories. She would have to stand before the math. The final confrontation did not happen in a dramatic courtroom with a gavel banging on a wooden desk. It happened in a sterile beige conference room on the fourth floor of a mediation center in downtown Denver. The air conditioner hummed with a monotonous drone that seemed to amplify the silence in the room. On one side of the long mahogany table sat my parents, Diane and Rick, and my sister Kendra. They looked like a tableau of defeated royalty. My mother was clutching a handkerchief, her eyes rimmed with red, radiating the energy of a martyr waiting for her canonization. My father sat with his arms crossed, staring at the grain of the wood table, refusing to look at me. Kendra was pale. She was wearing a simple gray sweater, a stark departure from the glittering silver dress she had worn at the party. She looked smaller, stripped of the bravado that usually acted as her armor. On the other side sat me, Ethan, and Natalie Granger. There was a court-appointed mediator at the head of the table, a retired judge with patience etched into the lines of his face. But the real authority in the room was the stack of files in front of Natalie. Kendra's lawyer, a man who looked like he regretted taking the case, tried to open with a speech about family unity. He talked about how misunderstandings happen and how the $28,000 invoice was clearly a satirical prop that I had taken too literally. He tried to frame me as humorless and litigious. Natalie let him finish. She didn't interrupt. She just waited until the silence stretched out, uncomfortable and heavy. Then she leaned forward. She didn't look at the lawyer. She looked at Kendra. She said that we were not there to discuss humor. She said we were there to discuss a pattern of financial predation. She pulled out the invoice, the one Kendra had handed me. She placed it next to the forensic accounting report of Kendra's spending. Natalie spoke with a chilling precision. She said that the invoice was not a joke. She said it was a strategic instrument. She explained that Kendra knew I was auditing the accounts. She knew I was asking questions. The purpose of handing me a bill for $28,000 in front of 50 witnesses was to establish a narrative where I was the debtor. It was a classic Darvo tactic: deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. Kendra flinched. She started to speak, her voice trembling. She said she just wanted to teach me a lesson about gratitude. I spoke up then. I didn't raise my voice. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see my big sister. I saw a stranger who had mugged me. I told her that I did not meet her lessons. I told the mediator that I was not looking for an apology. I wasn't looking for a hug. I said that I simply needed them to stop using me as their personal bank. I said I was closing the account. That was when the door opened, and the dynamic in the room shattered completely. Miles walked in. He was not sitting with Kendra. He walked to the far end of the table and stood there, his hands gripping the back of an empty chair. He looked at Kendra with a mixture of heartbreak and disgust that was painful to witness. Kendra whispered his name. She reached a hand out toward him. Miles didn't move. He spoke to the mediator, but his eyes were on his wife. He said that for 5 years, Kendra had told him that the reason their savings account never grew was because they were helping me. He said Kendra had painted a picture of me as a helpless, incompetent screw-up who was constantly on the verge of eviction. He said that every time he asked why they couldn't afford a vacation or a new car, Kendra told him that they had to send money to Quinn. He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. It was the email Kendra had sent to her friend, scripting the laughter for the party. He said that Kendra had to humiliate me publicly because if she didn't, if I was seen as successful and independent, her lie to him would fall apart. She needed me to be the failure so she could be the savior. He looked at Kendra and told her that he was filing for legal separation. He said he could forgive bad credit, but he could not forgive a decade of character assassination against her own sister. The The silence that followed was absolute. Then Kendra exploded. It wasn't a cry. It was a scream. She stood up, her chair clattering back against the wall. But she didn't yell at me. She didn't yell at Miles. She turned on her parents. She screamed at Diane. She asked why they let her do it. She shouted that they were the ones who told her she was special. She said they were the ones who told her she deserved the best of everything. She said they had raised her to be the star and me to be the audience. She pointed a shaking finger at Rick. She said that every time she needed money, he told her to ask Quinn. She said they made her feel like it was my duty to support her lifestyle because I was the boring one with a steady job. My mother gasped, clutching her chest. My father looked like he had been slapped. It was the raw, ugly truth of our family dynamic, vomiting itself out onto the conference table. They had fed Kendra on a diet of expectations and entitlements, and they had fed me on a diet of obligation. They had created a monster, and now they were shocked that it was eating them. I watched them turn on each other. I felt a strange detachment. I wasn't part of this anymore. I was just the observer. Natalie waited for the shouting to die down. Then she played the final card. She cleared her throat. She picked up the document with the lien clause, the one attached to the bridge loan I had given Kendra for the condo down payment. She spoke to Kendra's lawyer. She said that while this emotional display was illuminating, we had a legal reality to address. She reminded them that my loan to Kendra was secured by her property. She said that if a settlement was not reached and signed in this room within the next hour, we would be filing to foreclose on the lien. Kendra stopped crying. She looked at Natalie. She realized that this wasn't a game. This wasn't a family dispute she could charm her way out of. This was property law. She looked at me. She asked if I would really take her house. I looked back at her. I thought about the car loan she stuck me with. I thought about the nail salon visits paid for with my emergency fund. I told her that I didn't want her house. I told her I wanted my life back, and the price of my life was her compliance. The negotiation that followed was swift and brutal. Natalie drove the terms like a tank. We structured a repayment plan. It was realistic, meaning it would take years, but it was legally binding. Kendra's wages would be garnished. The lien would remain on the house until the debt was paid in full, meaning she couldn't sell it or refinance it without paying me first. We drafted the paperwork to remove my name from the car loan immediately. She would have to refinance it in her own name or sell the car. We included a strict no-contact order regarding my workplace. If Rick or Kendra ever showed up at Crestline again, it would trigger an immediate financial penalty. Then we got to the final point, the one that mattered more to me than the money. Kendra's lawyer asked if we were done. I said no. I said there was one more thing. I pulled out a laptop. I had drafted an email. I told them that the settlement was contingent on Kendra sending this specific email to the entire family distribution list. The aunts, the uncles, the cousins, the neighbors who had been at the party. Kendra read the screen. Her face went red. The email was simple. It stated that the invoice presented at Quinn's birthday party was a fabrication. It stated that Quinn Butler did not owe the family money. It stated that, in fact, Quinn had provided significant financial support to the family over the last decade. It apologized for the deception. Kendra looked at me with pure hatred. She said she couldn't send it. She said it would humiliate her. I leaned forward. I spoke softly. I told her that she had been willing to humiliate me for free. I told her that now the truth had a price tag. I pointed to the lien document. I told her she could send the email or she could explain to her neighbors why her house was being foreclosed on by her younger sister. She looked at Miles. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his wedding ring, twisting it on his finger. She looked at our parents. They were staring at the floor, unwilling to save her because they were too busy trying to save themselves from the shame. Kendra reached out. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely control the mouse. She clicked send. I watched the screen. I saw the message sent notification. I didn't feel a surge of joy. I didn't feel like jumping up and down. I felt a massive physical exhalation, like a corset had been unlaced from my ribs after 10 years. I stood up. I signed the settlement papers. I walked over to Ethan. He stood up and wrapped his hand around mine. His grip was warm and solid. I looked at my family one last time. They were sitting in the ruins of their own making. Kendra was crying softly. My parents looked old and gray. They had lost their bank, their scapegoat, and their golden child, all in 1 hour. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. The transaction was complete. We walked out of the conference room, down the long hallway and out into the bright, blinding sunlight of the Denver afternoon. I stood on the sidewalk and checked my phone. It was silent. No texts, no calls. The block list was working, but more importantly, the email had done its job. The truth was out there. The narrative had been corrected. Ethan squeezed my hand. He asked me if I felt like I had won. I looked at the busy street, at the people walking by who didn't know my name and didn't care about my money. I took a deep breath of the cool mountain air. I shook my head. I told him that I didn't win against her. I said that you don't win against family. You just survive them. I looked at my phone one last time, then slipped it into my pocket. I told him that I didn't win. I just finally stopped losing. And that was enough. Thank you so much for listening to the story of Quinn Butler and her battle for freedom. It is a heavy journey, but I hope it brings some satisfaction to see the truth finally come to light. I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Where are you listening from today? Have you ever had to draw a hard line with family like Quinn did? Let's support each other in the comment section. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Azad Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button to help us grow and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people who might need to hear it. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, stay strong and keep your receipts. Thanks to all.